The air in the Bonifacio Global City high-rise was a lie. It was recycled, chilled to a precise 22 degrees Celsius, and tasted of nothing. Rico Santos stood before the panoramic window of his corner office, the sterile silence a world away from the life he'd clawed his way out of. Below, the manicured lawns and glass towers of Manila's financial district glittered, a monument to order and wealth. He was a part of it now. A security consultant for men whose soft hands had never known the bite of a rifle's recoil or the filth of a Tondo canal. He was Rico Santos, former First Lieutenant, 1st Scout Ranger Regiment. An expert in urban warfare, a ghost who could navigate the concrete jungle as skillfully as his ancestors had navigated the literal one. He was also the boy who had fled the sprawling Tondo slums after his infant sister Maya was taken from her crib in the dead of night. His grandmother, her face a mask of terror in the flickering gas lamp, had wailed a single word, a name that had haunted his dreams for 20 years, Manananggal. He'd buried the memory, encased it in the same hardened logic and discipline that had seen him through the sieges of Marawi and Zamboanga. Monsters weren't real. There were no winged women who split at the waist. There were only desperate people, drugs, and the random brutal violence they spawned. Superstition was a disease of the poor, a way to explain the unexplainable. He had chosen reason. He had chosen steel. The encrypted phone buzzed on his desk, a burner he kept for connections he couldn't afford to acknowledge. The caller ID was a string of random numbers. He answered, his voice flat. Yes. The voice on the other end was gravelly, choked with a fear Rico had never heard from the man before. Santos, it's Kiko! Boss Kiko, the unofficial king of the Tondo dockyards. A man Rico had crossed paths with years ago. A dangerous but pragmatic creature of the slums. I'm busy, Kiko. It's the winged woman. Kiko rasped, the words tumbling out. The Aswang. She's back. My youngest. My daughter. She was her last meal. A sob cracked the man's iron voice. Now she has your niece, Maria. Rico's blood went cold. The sterile air in the office suddenly felt thick, suffocating. Maria, his sister's daughter, a bright, stubborn young woman who had insisted on working as a community nurse in the very place he'd escaped. Pregnant. Where is she? Rico's voice was a low growl, the consultant replaced by the soldier. Vanished from the clinic an hour ago, Kiko said. The midwife found the place wrecked. A hole in the tin roof, right above her station. Santos, you're the only one. You're military. You know how to hunt things that hide in the shadows. I'll give you anything. Men, money, information. Just kill it. Send it back to hell. Rico hung up, his knuckles white as he gripped the phone. The reflection in the window showed a man in a tailored suit, but his eyes were ancient, filled with a familiar primal dread. The lie of the chilled air and glass towers shattered. The humid, suffocating reality of Tondo was calling him home. The monster he'd spent a lifetime denying had just made it personal. Returning to Tondo was a physical assault. The air, thick with the stench of stagnant canal water, frying garlic, and uncollected refuse, clung to him like a shroud. The roar of jeepneys, the endless shouting, the cackle of stray dogs, it was a cacophony that vibrated deep in his bones, a forgotten language his body still understood. Here, shanties of corrugated tin and scavenged plywood were stacked one on top of the other, defying gravity, creating a labyrinth of perpetual twilight in the alleys below. Precarious bamboo bridges spanned canals choked with black sludge. This wasn't a city. It was a living, breathing organism, and it was choking. Boss Kiko's men, thin and wiry with watchful eyes, met him at the edge of the district. They didn't lead him to an office, but to the back of a bustling wet market, into a cramped room behind a stall selling pig heads. Kiko sat on a plastic crate, his face sallow, aged a decade since Rico last saw him. "She hunts the unborn," Kiko said, his voice barely a whisper. "Takes their hearts. The old ones say it gives her power, keeps her young." He pushed a heavy, oilskin-wrapped package across the table. "My grandfather used this. It's an heirloom, I guess." Rico unwrapped it. Inside was a sawed-off 12-gauge pump-action shotgun, its wooden stock worn smooth with age. Beside it were a dozen shells, their brass casings dull. "What's in these?" "Rock salt. Shards of blessed palms from Easter Sunday. And garlic. Lots of garlic," Kiko said, meeting his eyes. "Don't look at me like that, Santos. You're not in Makati anymore. The rules are different here. Your science and your bullets are useless against this thing. You fight it with salt and faith." Rico checked the action on the shotgun. It was smooth. "Where do I start?" "Start with the one everyone trusts," Kiko grunted. "The one who knows all the secrets and delivers all the babies. The one they call a saint." He spat on the floor. "Start with Aling Nida." Maria's clinic was a small, 2-room concrete box sealed with yellow police tape. A young officer stood guard, his uniform crisp and new, his face a mask of earnest concern. He introduced himself as Officer Miguel Reyes. "Sergeant Santos," Miguel said, his salute a little too sharp. "I read your file. It's an honor. This is a terrible business. I promise you, we're doing everything we can." Rico ignored the platitudes and ducked under the tape. The small examination room was a mess. Medical supplies were scattered. A chair was overturned. But his eyes were drawn upwards. Directly above a small cot was a jagged hole in the corrugated tin roof, the metal peeled back like a sardine can. There were no footprints, no signs of forced entry on the door or windows. Just the hole. His stomach churned. It was exactly as Kiko had described. The neighbors heard a strange flapping sound, like a big bat. Miguel offered, his notebook out, and a scream. By the time anyone got here, Maria was gone. "No witnesses?" Rico asked, his gaze sweeping the room, his ranger training kicking in, cataloging details. "Tondo has a million eyes, but no one ever sees anything," Miguel said with a sigh. "They're scared. I can't blame them. They talk in whispers. About an Aswang." He looked at Rico, expecting a cynical laugh. Rico didn't laugh. "What are the whispers saying?" "That it's an old curse. That it only appears when the moon is new. They say it's a woman from the community. Someone who walks among them during the day. A friend. A neighbor." The information solidified a cold dread in Rico's gut. A predator hiding in plain sight. He thought of Kiko's advice. "Do you know an old woman named Nida? Runs a carinderia near the port?" Miguel nodded. "Aling Nida? Of course. Everyone knows her. She's the heart of this place. Helped my own mother when she was sick. She's a living saint." A saint. The perfect camouflage. Aling Nida's carinderia was an oasis of warmth and light in the grimy alleyway. The smell of adobo and simmering broth filled the air. Behind a counter laden with steaming pots of food stood a small, wizened woman with a beatific smile and eyes that crinkled with kindness. She moved with a gentle grace, serving food to the local stevedores and children, her voice a soothing balm. Rico sat at a small table, and she came over, wiping her hands on her apron. "Rico, is that you? My, you've grown into such a strong man. I haven't seen you since you were a boy, running these very streets." Her memory was unnervingly sharp. "Aling Nida," he said, his voice level. "I'm looking for my niece, Maria." Her face fell into a mask of perfect sympathy. "Oh, that poor child. I heard the terrible news. Such a sweet girl, always helping everyone. The devil walks among us, Rico. We must pray for her safe return. She placed a bowl of hot arroz caldo in front of him. Here, eat. You look like you carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. He stared at the rice porridge. His grandmother used to make it for him when he was sick, lacing it with ginger and garlic. He looked at ailing Nita's hands. They were old, wrinkled, but clean and steady. He could see no monster in her, only a kind old woman, the type of grandmother everyone wished they had. Yet, as he ate, he felt her eyes on him, and they weren't just kind. They were ancient, intelligent, and utterly unreadable. A chill, entirely separate from the memory of his past, traced its way down his spine. He was being measured. He was being hunted. For 2 days, Rico walked the suffocating maze of Tondo, a ghost in his own past. He operated on pure instinct, the soldier overriding the man. He slept in 2-hour shifts, the shotgun never leaving his side. He ate nothing he didn't see prepared, his senses on a knife's edge. Every flutter of a tarp in the wind sounded like wings. Every shadow seemed to coalesce into a monstrous shape. He was becoming as paranoid as the people he'd once scorned. He and Miguel worked the case, but every lead was a dead end. The locals were a wall of terrified silence. They would cross themselves when he mentioned Maria's name, whispering about a debt that had to be paid to the shadows. It was a language of fear, and Rico was beginning to understand its grammar. On the 3rd night, the night of the new moon, his burner phone rang. It was Miguel, his voice tight with excitement. "I've got something, Rico. A source. A drug runner who owes me a favor. He saw a group of people taking a woman into the old San Ignacio church, the one that was bombed out during the war. He said they looked like a cult. It has to be her." The San Ignacio church was a skeletal ruin in the heart of Tondo's most derelict sector, a place even the gangs avoided. It was infamous, a place of bad omens, a perfect lair. "I'm on my way," Rico said. "Wait for me at the corner of Delpan and Zaragoza. I'll be there. We'll get her back, Rico. I swear it." Rico grabbed the shotgun and a bandolier of Kiko's special shells. He stuffed fistfuls of coarse rock salt and crushed garlic into his pockets. He felt a strange sense of calm descend upon him. The hunt was over. The fight was about to begin. He was stepping back into the world of his grandmother's stories, armed not just with a gun, but with the very superstitions he had rejected. He met Miguel at the designated corner. The young cop was jumpy, his hand hovering over his service pistol. "They're inside," he whispered, pointing towards the jagged silhouette of the ruined church. "My source said they're most active on the new moon. Some kind of ritual." They moved through the rubble-strewn streets, their footsteps muffled by the city's hum. The church loomed before them, its collapsed roof open to the starless ink-black sky. A faint, rhythmic chanting emanated from within. "I'll take the back. You take the main entrance," Rico said, his voice a low command. "On my signal." Miguel nodded, his eyes wide. "Be careful, Rico." Rico circled around the back, moving with a fluid silence that belied his size. He found a collapsed wall, a perfect entry point into what was once the apse. He peered through. The scene inside froze his blood. At the center of the nave, where the main altar once stood, was a desecrated stone slab. Maria was chained to it, her nurse's uniform torn, her face pale with terror. Surrounding her was a coven of 20 people, their faces familiar from the streets, their eyes glazed with fanaticism. And in the center, leading the chant, was Aling Nida. And then Rico saw Miguel step out from behind a pillar, not with his gun drawn, but with his head bowed. "He is here, matriarch," Miguel said, his voice trembling. "As promised." Aling Nida stopped chanting. Her kind, grandmotherly face turned towards the shadows where Rico was hidden. Her smile was no longer warm. It was predatory, ancient, and filled with a terrifying power. "Welcome home, little ranger," she hissed, her voice echoing in the cavernous ruin. "You were always a stubborn boy, so eager to run from your own blood." The coven turned as one, their faces contorting with hate. Rage, white-hot and pure, surged through Rico. It wasn't just about Maria anymore. It was about Maya. It was about the lie he had lived for 2 decades. He stepped from the shadows, the pump-action shotgun held steady. "Let her go, Nida." Aling Nida cackled, a dry, rattling sound. "You cannot stop what is to come. The Bat-Father demands his tithe. Her child's heart will grant us another generation of life." She threw her head back, and a sound of tearing, of wet cartilage and sinew ripping apart, filled the church. Rico watched in abject horror as her upper body began to pull away from her waist. Her spine elongated with a series of sickening cracks. Her torso lifted, trailing glistening entrails and organs like obscene streamers. Her skin stretched and tore as huge, leathery bat wings erupted from her shoulder blades, unfurling with a sound like wet leather. The thing that was once Aling Nida was now a nightmare given form. Her lower half stood placidly where she had been, a grotesque pedestal of flesh, while her winged torso, a shrieking horror of dangling viscera, shot into the air, circling beneath the ruined roof. The coven surged forward, armed with rusty machetes and pipes. Rico didn't hesitate. The shotgun roared, the blast of rock salt catching the first 2 fanatics in the chest, sending them screaming to the ground as if burned by acid. He worked the pump, a fluid, practiced motion. Another blast took down a third. He was a whirlwind of controlled violence, using his CQC training to disarm, to cripple. An elbow shattered a jaw, a kick broke a knee. They were many, but they were a mob. He was a soldier, but he couldn't take his eyes off the true threat. The Manananggal dove. It was impossibly fast. Rico threw himself to the side, rolling behind a crumbling pillar as a long, tubular tongue, like a grotesque proboscis, slammed into the spot where he'd been, cracking the stone. The shriek it let out was a physical force, rattling his teeth. He fired upwards. The salt shot peppered its leathery wing, and the monster screamed in pain and fury, veering off. It swooped towards Maria. "No!" Rico bellowed. He abandoned his cover, charging across the open space, firing as he ran. The coven members tried to intercept him, but he bowled through them, his focus absolute. The monster was hovering over Maria, its horrible tongue descending. Rico fired his last shell into its torso. It recoiled, shrieking, and turned its full, murderous attention on him. He was out of ammo and surrounded. The coven closed in, their eyes wild. The flying horror circled above, preparing for another strike. Rico was going to die here. And then he remembered. His grandmother's frantic, terrified words from that night 20 years ago. "You can't kill the head. You have to find the body. You have to stop it from rejoining." The lower half. He scanned the chaos. The lower half of Aling Nida's body was still standing near the altar, motionless, vulnerable. That was the target. That was the key. He drew the heavy combat knife from his boot. It was a desperate, insane plan. With a primal roar, he charged not away from the coven, but through them, towards the altar. He took a cut on his arm, a blow to the ribs, but he didn't slow. He was a force of nature, a single-minded engine of destruction. He broke through the line, vaulting over the altar. The Manananggal shrieked, realizing his intent, and dove straight for him. Rico ignored it. He reached the standing torso, a sight so bizarre and horrifying. His mind threatened to break. He plunged his hands into his pockets, pulling out the fistfuls of rock salt and crushed garlic, and shoved them deep into the open, gory cavity of the creature's waist. The effect was instantaneous and cataclysmic. The flying torso let out a soul-tearing scream of pure agony. It was not a sound of this world. It convulsed in mid-air, its flight becoming erratic. Black smoke, smelling of sulfur and burnt meat, poured from the point of connection. It was being poisoned from its other half. It abandoned its attack on Rico, clawing frantically at the open sky, trying to escape. The coven stared in horror, their fanaticism breaking. A pale gray light began to filter through the broken roof. Dawn. The Manananggal thrashed, trapped within the church walls. It slammed against a high, arched window, shattering the remaining stained glass. A single pure ray of the rising sun pierced the gloom and touched its wing. It ignited. The creature erupted into a column of screaming fire, a torch of writhing damnation. It fell from the sky, a burning meteor of flesh and bone, and crashed onto the stone floor, where it was consumed by unholy flames until only a pile of greasy black ash remained. Silence. The coven broke. They scrambled over each other, screaming in terror, fleeing into the alleys. Rico stumbled to the altar, his knife flashing as he cut Maria's bonds. She collapsed into his arms, sobbing. Behind them, Miguel stood, his face a ruin of shame. Rico, get her out of here. Rico rasped, pushing Maria towards him. Now, in a final desperate act of redemption, Miguel nodded, helping the weakened Maria towards a side exit. Rico stood alone in the desecrated church, the stench of ash thick in the air. He looked at the shotgun, at the salt scattered on the floor, at the spot where the monster had died. He had run from this his entire life, from the whispers, the folklore, the darkness that lived in the heart of his home. And in the end, the only way to save his family was to embrace it, to believe in the monster, and to kill it with the very things he had called superstition. He walked out of the ruins of San Ignacio, stepping from the absolute darkness into the brilliant, chaotic light of a Tondo morning. The city was alive. Jeepneys were roaring. Vendors were shouting. Life, in all its messy, vibrant glory, was exploding around him. He had descended into the nightmare of his childhood and dragged his family back into the Sunday. The ghosts of the past were not gone, but for the first time in his life, they were silent.